Welcome back to the Young Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer McPartland. Today's guest is Rick Morse, a wealth advisor who has 30 plus years helping entrepreneurs, especially in both music and the IP industries. He has worked with people such as artists, right holders, founders who experience major revenue spikes from catalog sales, licensing deals, touring, or liquidity events, and helping them turn moments into long-term sustainability and not short-term spending. Making money is one skill, and keeping and multiplying it is another. Um, Today we're going to talk about what happens after success hits and why revenue alone doesn't guarantee security. So, Rick, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
My first question is, you've seen entrepreneurs win big and lose it. What's the biggest misconception founders have about wealth after a large revenue spike?
That it's going to continue to keep coming, and they finally achieved the modicum of success and they want to go out and enjoy it. They want to help their friends. They want to help their families, at least some of them anyway. And otherwise, some just want to spend it on themselves. And then they realize that they didn't plan accordingly. Perhaps they didn't plan for all the taxes that are going to have to be paid on the money. So if they get a big win, I don't know, I'll just pick a number of $5 million. The government probably two of that, and they don't really think about that, or they worry about it later. One of the first things people should do is hopefully have a good plan in place when they are about to have a liquidity event, and meet with attorneys and accountants and financial advisors to know what to do with the money and what they have to put away and for when. So recently a client did sell their business. They got a substantial amount of money, I think about $14 million for it. And somewhere around $4.5 million is going to go to the IRS on April 14th. So we put the money basically in a CD or treasury bond, actually, that comes due on April 13th. And on April 14th, they're going to wire that to the Internal Revenue Service. It pains them, but they're ready. They know that the entire 14 million wasn't theirs, and some of it has to go to Uncle Sam, and they won't end up in debtor's prison or bankrupt, because I could tell you the penalties and interest on failure to pay your taxes is enormous. Think about credit card debt, how quickly that ramps up. IRS debt isn't as usurious, but it's still substantial, especially the penalties, and they're not very forgiving.
Now, as part of it too, about budgeting, if you will, and then having a separate allocation account for putting you get your full amount of money, but you take half of it and you put it in the government's money, if you will, and then the other half is yours to spend as you see fit.
Right. And hopefully what you have left over, now you're planning for your own future. Okay, so we tend to break it up between needs and ideal aspirations. Maybe the ideal aspiration is a yacht, but you have to remember that that yacht comes with significant expenses for cruise, dockage fees, fuels, even if it's a vacation home, property taxes, maintenance on the house, etc. The first thing that people should prepare for is, how much do I need to live on for the rest of my life if I don't get any more money? And you're going to get some. You may be doing some touring, or you have a record contract and money will be coming in each year over that period of time. But what happens when that ends? Think about athletes whose careers are fairly short, just for the physical aspect. Not that they're not a great athlete, but only few of them get to make a lot of money post-career as either announcers or producers or doing something else, where the rest have to live off of what they earned for a long period of time. And many of them grew up not in great wealth, and all of a sudden now they have money and they want to enjoy themselves. We try and act as psychologists or untrained psychologists a little bit and help them tone that down.
Now, my next question is, you said revenue doesn't equal security. What actually creates it?
Wealth creates it, knowing that you have money set aside in the worst case scenarios. You have money to take care of it. So if you have a home and all of a sudden you find you need a new roof, or you need some other big expense, it could be God forbid, a medical bill that comes up. If you know you have the money set aside, your stress level is going to be a lot lower, right? So again, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep, and planning accordingly. So if you're a recording artist or a musician and you're out touring, same thing with a ball player, in any professional sport. If you're playing in Florida, you're not being taxed by Florida for state income taxes because they don't have it. New York does, Minnesota does, California does, some states don't. So you have to plan accordingly to make sure you're putting aside those performance fees to cover the taxes. Think about all the articles that have been out there about either Hollywood or music stars that all of a sudden ended up in a financial bind for tax, because of tax reasons, or just bad planning on their part.
Or part of it is the fact that the manager or whoever takes like a large percentage of their money and kind of leaves them with nothing.
Right. Well, it shouldn't be that large. Managers typically get 15%, agents get 10%, and the rest is supposed to be yours. If the manager's unscrupulous, maybe they're charging expenses. I mean, right, there were stories, countless stories about performers whose managers didn't treat them fairly. It's a little tougher now, I think, for them to get away with that, but it's still out there. So you want to make sure that you're using someone who is reputable, that you've been referred to by someone who's used them and hasn't had a problem, not the snake oil salesman that comes along and says, "Oh, sign with me. I'm going to make you a star." And all you do is make them rich and not yourself.
My next question is creative income is unpredictable, big wins, quiet periods. How should founders structure around that?
Okay. Again, financial planning, you can't help the fact that the industry is designed that way, that you have some songs that are big hits, some that aren't, or you do a performance and it's a sold out performance, and probably the next ones will be. The next tour may not be as lucrative as the last one. So it's just about continuing to make sure you set aside a certain amount of money so that if one of the tours or one of the albums isn't as big a hit as you hoped, it doesn't put you in a bind. Maybe disappointing emotionally, but at least it's not financially ruinous.
Now, can you kind of give examples of people that you've worked with that have done well, if you will?
Sure. I mean, I can't name names
Yeah, of course, but
of
like
any
just
sort,
some examples.
but just where someone made a film and did very well with it, or television show, or even someone who was a partner at a big accounting firm that got bought out and we set aside money. They had philanthropic goals. So we put money into what's called a donor advised fund, or you set up a foundation. And it depends what makes the most sense for the client, but they wanted to be able to give back. So they put money aside so that in later years, they could be philanthropic. Also to make sure they, like I said before, over their tax bill that's coming due in April. And this happened, a few years ago with two brothers who had sold their business and had significant wealth. And they made sure they set aside money for taxes, make sure they set aside money for themselves. They took care of their employees as well. Again, it's all about planning. If you think about people that win the lottery, oftentimes you don't hear about it until 9 months or 10 months after that there was a winning ticket that finally got cashed in. That's because they didn't run to the lottery office and get a check. They went to an accountant or a lawyer or both and set up, and a financial advisor, someone like us, to set up a plan and to do that in a systematic way that met their goals, met their needs, and will not put them in a bind. And so they won't be the millionaires who all of a sudden have no money 3 years later, right? You hear about those stories too.
Now, my next question is what usually goes wrong in the first 6 to 12 months after a large payout, which is kind of what I think you were starting to talk about with people who are millionaires who either keep their money or you hear about who lose it very quickly.
Right. Typically, it's about emotions and the excitement, and perhaps they grew up not in great wealth, and all of a sudden now they're going out and buying the fancy sports car. There's an attorney nearby who does personal injury law, right? Nothing to do with entertainment, but I get a call one day. I'm sending someone up to you. He just won a $3 million lawsuit for damages, and I told him to go straight to you and set up a financial plan, and this money should last him the rest of his life. Well, he never made it here. First place he went to while he was driving towards me was stop at the Porsche dealership. And next thing you know, his wife is getting new dental work done and cosmetic surgery and all the things that go with it. And they stop off at a fancy clothing store and buy a whole new wardrobe. And before you know it, that money was gone. So it's about emotions, and it's a way to, we try and encourage them to temper the emotions and set up a plan for them.
Now, and is so kind of what I'm hearing is that it's a lot about like ego, if you will, or about thinking you're fully in control until it turns out that you're not, and then you realize what was I doing with this large sum amount of money?
right? Regrets are tough to have. You could live with not having spent a lot of money and say, gee, why didn't I buy this? I could have afforded it. So you could go buy it now, as opposed to, yeah, I bought this, I couldn't afford it, and I can't sell it for anywhere near what I paid for it. And now I'm in a bind.
Now, my next question is preparing for a catalog sale or liquidity event. Which decisions matter most before closing?
The structure in which the deal is created, and that's less about what you do with me as opposed to what you do with a lawyer and an accountant. Right. So there's ways to set it up where the tax ramifications aren't as onerous as some other ways. So doing some estate planning, putting things in trusts. Again, that's more with the lawyers and the accountants than it is with me. But it's imperative that you get good advice on how to structure the deal. You know, many times in the early days of the music industry, a lot of performers were enticed by, even small amounts of money, and they realized that they signed their life away for doing that. Again, the only ones that got rich were the record producers or their agents, and not themselves. They they got paid $10,000, but those songs were making money because they sold the rights to the songs to the producers for the rest of their lives.
Kind of like with Elvis and rock and roll in the 50s or in the 60s.
Sure, 100%.
Now, to follow up that question, what's the mistake of treating a large payout like permanent income?
Exactly that, treating it like permanent income, like you're going to get it every year. Know that this was a one-time sale. Even Bruce Springsteen or Paul Simon or Bob Dylan, who sold their catalogs for hundreds of millions of dollars, they know they can't do that again. They'll still make money touring, right? Bruce Springsteen still tours. Bob Dylan still, I don't know if he tours, but Paul Simon's doing a concert I saw in Forest Hills during the summer. So they're still making money. Do they need it? No. Do they like it? Sure. It's not easy to give up, and they enjoy performing, which may be one of the reasons why they're so good. But that catalog sale, that's a one-time event, and you could be sure that they got good advice about how to handle it. And just because you're not Paul Simon or Bruce Springsteen, you should also get good advice.
Now, a follow-up to that is how does identity shift when revenue jumps?
Depends on the individual. Okay, but one of the traps that people have, and this is true of any industry, and it's a creep of like it's called lifestyle creep, that as you make more money, you're spending more on your lifestyle. So the trick is you could increase your lifestyle a little bit. Everyone's got a desire to do certain things that they weren't able to do, but do it in moderation and make sure you're prepared for when that income slows down or stops. And think about retirement. At some point, you're not going to be able to tour. Not everybody is Mick Jagger, who could tour into their 90s. Some people don't make it to the 90s, and that's another issue, especially if they have a family. What do you do, right? There was an actor, not anyone I was familiar with, from one of the, I think it was a soap opera or primetime, where unfortunately the person had ALS and died in their 50s. Well, hopefully they planned accordingly once they were diagnosed, but not everyone knows that, thankfully. There aren't too many people that are diagnosed where they know in 4 years they're probably not going to be alive, that they plan even ahead of time in a just-in-case scenario.
Now, to follow up that, what external pressures, family, peers, lifestyle, distort judgment after success? Because I think you started to talk about a little bit, like making more money and how it kind of clouts your ability to know what to spend your money on, what to be smart about, if you will.
Sure. Well, you do have some pressure from family members, right? If they know you're successful, and they have needs or maybe wants, and they disguise their wants as needs, and they come a calling with their hands out. And then also being susceptible or not being susceptible to people calling you up with great investment ideas. Hey, I have an investment idea. You could put $500,000 in this, and you're guaranteed to make, 5 million from it. Oh, really? Yeah, that sounds good. Let me go ahead and do that. Well, my old adage is, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And so whether it's a Madoff type scenario, but people prey upon unsophisticated people who came into money all of a sudden, whether they're athletes, musicians, someone that won the lottery, anything along those lines. And be careful of friends and family as well. It's nice to be able to help them, just within reason.
So kind of being like being generous, but not being that vital organ or that cushion, if you will, for having to give out constant money, if you will.
Right. Make sure that you're not being taken advantage of, and you never want to be in a position to have to support someone for the rest of their lives, right? It's not your responsibility. Even your own children, right? You want to make sure that they're self-sufficient and independent. Help them out a little bit, but not necessarily be the crutch on which they could rely, because that's not good for either one of you.
Now, you talked earlier about how certain people um, they're very lucky in the fact that obviously if they're an athlete, they make money, whether it's brand endorsements. How do you think that that works? Like if you look at Michael Jordan for being a basketball player and then having the brand deal with Nike and then being able to get into IndyCar and everything else and having a separate career from that.
He was a smart businessman, and that doesn't happen all too often. It's great when it does. Good for him. I happen to know his business manager a little bit, and they run a business. Not everybody has that acumen to do it. So you want to make sure that you don't blow up your career by doing silly things that makes your name bad, so that your endorsements continue. How many people have you seen, said or did stupid things that all of a sudden their endorsement deal got cut, right? Because your ability to play basketball using that as a sport is only going to be for a certain number of years, right? It's much more limited than, let's say, a Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney, who are playing, late into life. You're not playing basketball late into life, but you may be able to continue to do commercials and have endorsements late in life if your name sells or your image sells, right? So is it NIL, name, image, and likeness? That could be worth a lot of money if you craft your name, image, and likeness to good use and don't make it that it's something that can't be sold because you did something silly.
Now, my next question is what separates founders who build generational stability from those with temporary success, like just short term versus long term, if you will?
Maturity and being able to listen to someone else's advice and knowing what you don't know. Right? There are things in life I don't know. I know about this. I'm very good at it, but I hire people to do certain things and I rely on their opinion and their advice. And you have to rely on, if a financial advisor gives you advice about what you could afford to spend and to do, or your accountant tells you you're going to need this money for taxes, make sure you listen to them and don't say, I'll worry about it later. The student in school who waited till the night before the test to cram for it, and all of a sudden it's not so easy to do. While it's no fun. The good musicians practice, right? Some may be, have a great gift and they pick it up easily, but most people have to practice. Good actors learn their craft.
Now, how do you, working in the industry, how do you think that people approach the advice? Do you think that it's a lot of applying what has been suggested and the other is not applying it? Or do you think that it's a lot of people who actually take the advice that they're given from the finance, like from somebody who works in the finance business and applying it to their life or their portfolio or whatever it is?
I strongly suggest taking the advice of people that know. And yes, look, there are always new ways to do things, right? You wouldn't have technology going as far as it has without people taking chances and creating something that no one thought was needed or wanted, right? What did Steve Jobs once say? He said, how does someone know what they want if it hasn't been invented yet? So yes, it's good to be creative and to learn new things, but financial planning and budgeting, you want to make sure those are in place so you can create, let's say, new music or a new genre that wasn't there before, right? Someone invented rock and roll, right? It wasn't there, right? What did it come in the 50s and it was picked up, you could say, from rhythm and blues music, and it transitioned over to rock music, but people took chances and they experimented. Or even in sports, right? There are new ways of, let's say, tennis, hitting a backhand. It was always one-handed. Then people came up with the method of having a two-handed backhand. And now no one uses a one, or I don't think very few people use a one-handed backhand anymore. So things evolve, but you want to make sure you have the basics in place to allow your career to evolve.
Now, my next question is what financial discipline feels restrictive early but creates long-term leverage?
Putting money away on a regular basis. So I try and tell people, pay yourself first and then take care of the wants later. So again, I break it up between needs and wants and make sure that you're socking away and investing a certain amount of money so that money is working for you. So to give you an example, if you put a fixed amount of money away from ages 25 to 35, and the other person does the same amount with the same rate of return from 35 to 65, they'll end up with the same amount of money. And yet one only had to put it away for 10 years because they started early. The other one had to put it away for 30 years. Big difference.
Because of the compounding effect between the two.
Yep. It's about the power of compounding. Okay. When I start, and being willing to take a certain amount of risk. So when I started in the business, it was October of 1993. The Dow Jones average was, I think, 3,500, give or take a couple of digits in there. Now today I saw it's 49,590 or a little higher. That's a total return, not counting dividends, which is an enormous part of it, probably another 2.5% of 8.5% a year. You don't get that in a checking account. You don't get that even in a savings account. Money markets today are paying 3.5%. So that alone, you add in dividend reinvestment, you're looking at over 10% a year. And that includes 2008 tech, the financial crisis. It includes the 2000 tech bubble. It includes 9/11, all the other times when the market, even the depression. It includes all these different years that took place, and the economy rebounded. The money came back. So as long as you're patient and don't panic, you're in good shape.
Now, is part of it putting it in real estate, or is part of it just like setting it up in the index fund and then just letting it grow for?
I really can't
years?
talk about individual investment ideas, but it's having a good asset allocation model, a good financial plan, and it depends on the time that you're doing it, depends on your risk level, and depends on your liquidity needs. So for instance, if you're buying real estate, and I'm not talking about real estate investment trusts through the stock market, we just realize real estate's not that liquid. If you decide you want to sell it, it could take a few months. You have to go through a whole process of closing, et cetera, finding buyers, as opposed to other things that are more liquid. But they're all good investments for the right person at the right time.
Now, my next question is, how did you achieve work-life balance as a business owner, especially in a career centered around others' financial pressure?
I worked hard, I worked smart, and I made sure I made time for myself, but I also knew that I would feel better knowing that early on, if I put the time in, I'll have more time later on in my career for doing what I needed to do. But I did go to every single one of my son's sporting events, and we managed to pay for college. Well, not that I was making a huge amount of money back then, but I started a discipline that when he was born, I immediately started putting money away to fund his college education. So he was fortunate enough to go to college without any loans, was fortunate enough to go to law school that we were able to pay for. And that was because we were just disciplined about what was important to us. Other people say, let them pay for it. No one paid for me. That's a lifestyle choice. That's a parenting choice. I'm not being critical one way or the other. But in order for us to meet that goal, we had to plan for it. And that was a goal of ours. If your plan is to buy a home, start saving so you can come up with a down payment and know what the amount is that you need.
Now, to piggyback off of that, if you could ask the next guest a question, but you don't know who the next guest is, what would that question be?
I guess you may ask this of me once I throw that out there. But if you had to do something, if you could do one thing differently than you did when you started, what would that be?
Kind of taking like a reflective look back at the career, if you will, and seeing what worked and what didn't work.
Probably focusing on particular type of clientele earlier on. I think if you're trying to be a generalist and be all things to all people, it's a lot more difficult to build a business. Whereas you become an expert in a few industries. So my industry actually, when I started out, was healthcare. So I came from an accounting firm focused on healthcare, and ultimately we started a computer software company focused on healthcare. So the people I knew were in the healthcare industry, and that was great. And then I expanded, and at one point I tried to do a lot of different things and eventually started focusing, had a more narrow focus on what I was doing.
Who are 2 to 3 operators, not influencers, that would be great, that would make strong future guests for the podcast?
What do you mean by operators?
Like people that you know, or people that like people that you would recommend.
I would say it could be from talent agents, whether it's from, and I'm not suggesting these are the end all be all firms, but just the ones that come to mind, whether it's someone from WME or CAA or someplace like that, that could give guidance about career advice for your audience, or perhaps business managers could talk about booking agents, how to produce an album. That's, my area is finance. So I don't know about those areas. I don't know how to tell someone, what's the best way to get a start in a career in music. I can help them once they get, once they're successful, we could help them be financially secure. I'm spitballing with this here. So
Yeah. Um, Rick, thank you for breaking this down, especially the part of the entrepreneur, which most people ignore until it's too late. Obviously, you've kind of flushed that out and uh, given good advice and told people to follow and to be disciplined and to know what's a need versus a want, right? This has been episode number 31 of the Young Entrepreneurs Podcast. If you found value in this conversation, make sure to follow, subscribe, and leave us a review, and we will see you next time.
thank you again for having me, and enjoy the weekend.
You as well. Thank you very much.